patience today as we kick off our first in-person hotel ABTEL meeting. Are gathered around the room. I'm looking for any guests. Interested if I have some guests. And using a PowerPoint when we can to project some things on the screen for the live stream projection. So again, if there are some challenges in-house, we may pause. I also would like all those that are using and accessing the YouTube link to make sure you are muted and your camera is off as well. And I will turn the meeting over to Nancy Bradley, who will be presiding today.
Since we've been able to do that. Oh, thank you. It's great to see everybody. I want to thank Joan. I'm going to start off by thanking Joan and her team. They have had a monumental task this year. And every time I contact, I always get the friendliest responses from Janelle, from Maggie, from Joan. And I just want you guys to know how much we appreciate you, and we know what you're doing for all of us in both teacher education and in our public schools. We've had, some continued challenges with COVID and weather and different things, and it's just really nice that we're able to get together. I want to start today by welcoming some new members to our ranks. We have, and I'm going to say their names, and then I'm going to let them introduce themselves. First, we have Miss Jean Connolly. Can you introduce yourself, Jean? Janine, I'm sorry, I said your name. All right.
I'm Janine Conley. I'm from King George County Schools. I teach fourth grade at Potomac Elementary, and my principal nominated me for this committee, so I'm glad I get to be a part of it, and been doing this for about 16 years.
Well, welcome, Janine. It is always, we love our teacher voices on this committee, and so it's great to have you here. All right, we also have Miss Sherry Hatton. Welcome, Sherry.
My name is Sherry Hatton. I'm a middle school band director in Smithfield, Virginia, and Isle of Wight County, as well as an arts integration specialist with the Institute for Arts Integration and STEAM. And I'm super excited to be here as a part of this team for 3 years.
Welcome. And then we have Miss Shelby Elliott, and I want.
Hi, good morning. I'm Shelby Elliott, the admin coordinator for certification and compliance for Prince William County Public Schools in Manassas, Virginia. Very excited to be here. Thank you.
I'd then like to have other members introduce themselves, and I think we'll just do our best teacher voices rather than trying to pass a mic. And so I will start, and then we'll just maybe go around this way. I'm Nancy Bradley, and I am at Virginia Tech. I'm the Associate Director for the Office of Academic Programs. I also serve on the school board in the city of Salem, and so I actually serve as a citizen at large on ABTEL. And this is my 4th year on 5th year on 4.5 years on ABTEL. So I got one more. So then we'll.
Good morning, I'm Steve Whitten. I teach 6th grade English at Bluestone Middle in Mecklenburg County.
It's one of 8, I can tell you.
Good morning, I'm Nick Homer. I'm the educator specialist for Sorry, Maggie Clemens. I'm the director of licensure and school leadership at the department.
Good morning, Dr. Joan Johnson, Assistant Superintendent, Teacher Ed and Licensure. Thank you all will be in my house. And I represent secondary special education.
Okay, now that we've gotten to know everybody, what we would like to do now is, you said we do not have any guests, correct? There's nobody in attendance? Okay, all right, so we will go and move on to
But I
that.
do have a public comment. I have emailed a public comment from Dr. Ross Collins. You'll see that email. I just sent that around.
Okay,
One guest is presenting with us today.
okay, so we'll do the public comment at the do we need to read that email out loud or just share it? Okay, all right, that sounds good. All right, well, you should have received, as a packet sent via email, and within that, there was the agenda, including the items we will discuss today. We do need a motion to approve that agenda as presented. Need a second?
Steve with the second.
Okay, with that, we will go ahead. Do we still need to do the roll call votes? Are we done with that? Okay. Aye. Okay, thank you. We also had the minutes from our November 15th meeting. Are there any corrections that need to be made to the minutes? Any amendments? Yes.
On page
Oh, reading. Okay, good catch. Okay, have we noted that? Any other amendments? Yes, Eric.
My name is spelled
It is Maffa, not Moffat, not yes. So Moffa. So if we could make sure that Eric's name is spelled correctly, that would be great. Any other amendments to the minutes? Okay, I need a motion to approve the minutes. Second? Okay. Then we'll let. All right, we're good now. Good. That's what I was hoping. Okay, and then the next item is public comment, and you did receive an email from Joan Johnson. Oh, okay. All right, go ahead. Aye. Okay. All right. For public comment, we do have an email public comment that has been sent to everybody for review. Joan said we do not need to read that out loud, but just for your reference to make sure that you're aware of that. Oh. Okay. Do you want me to do that, or do you want to do that? Okay, I can do that. All right. This comment comes from, looking to see. Let's see. Joan, who did this come from? I'm sorry.
You see, it introduces on behalf of the executive board. You see that?
Oh, hang on. I said, we, the executive board of the Virginia Association of Teachers of English, VATE, have seen the VCLA keep many working class teachers of color out of teaching. Such inequities in teacher licensure are the subject of a major forthcoming report from the Virginia Commonwealth University School of Education and Wilder School of Government and Public Affairs. Teacher educators on VAT's executive board agree the VCLA provides little information about teacher candidates they cannot gather from candidates' academic transcripts, recommendations, and Praxis 2 scores. Therefore, VATE's executive board recommends the following changes be made to the VCLA, All teacher candidates take the VCLA one time. Candidates who pass the VCLA with a composite score of 470, the current standard, are finished with the assessment. Candidates who do not pass the VCLA must pursue remediation by completing and passing learning modules focused on literacy skills. Appropriate modules will be identified and endorsed by the VDOE. Candidates who complete and pass required learning modules achieve status equal to candidates who pass the VCLA. All right, next thing is the reminder, we have 2 more meetings this year, one on March 21st and one on April 18th. So please mark your calendars for those meetings. The next thing we have on our agenda is a presentation from Phil Gillian from Pearson regarding the VCLA regeneration and customized assessment overview. So we would like to welcome Phil for a presentation.
And I'll do a brief introduction. Also, I can get his presentation up.
As we heard from the public comment, there has been discussion around assessments, specifically national assessments, for some time in our state. And so we continue to seek information and innovative ways to address those concerns. And so again, we have today with us a representative from Pearson who will be presenting information to us on the VCLA, knowing that it is recommended that you evaluate and review assessments in general every 5 years or so from a psychometric perspective. So again, we have a presentation today just to update us on the VCLA and what the review and regeneration process potentially could be. Again, it's just an informational presentation today, and we have with us Mr. Phil Gullen, the Vice President of Educator Solution for Licensing and Learning Evaluation Systems at Pearson. Thank you.
And I'm just going to speak from these 2 documents, which are also the ones on the slides that Dr. Johnson is sharing. But I'm just going to pass these hard copies out as well. Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me okay? I want to thank Dr. Johnson and all of you folks on the board for inviting me here today. I have been to ABTEL meetings before, but it's been many years now. I actually live just down the road in Norfolk, Virginia, but I have a long history in the state. My parents live in Roanoke. I used to live up in Culpeper, so I have a real soft spot for education in Virginia, and I really appreciate all the good work that you folks do to be sure that we have the quality education in the state that we all want. As Dr. Johnson already mentioned, I work for Pearson. Pearson is the organization that delivers the VCLA for Virginia. VCLA is a state-specific assessment. It's different as a result than the praxis test that you folks use off the shelf for the other areas of licensure in the state. So I just want to take a few minutes to provide an overview of what state-specific assessments in educator licensure development is all about, because that's going to be important context as we start a conversation with you folks around the possibility of redeveloping the VCLA. So that's why I'm starting where I'm starting. Pearson, as you folks know, is a big education company that does all kinds of different things. Our particular part of Pearson, the evaluation systems group of Pearson, does absolutely nothing except educator licensure assessments. So I can't really talk to you about K-12 assessments, can't really talk to you about higher education courseware or anything else that Pearson does in all the different realms of education. I've really spent a good chunk of my career working only in educator licensure development and delivery. So that's what we do. This map that you see here represents all of the Pearson educator licensure and teacher performance assessments that we do around the country. As you can see on the map, there's a number of different national assessments that our group of Pearson develops and delivers for certain clients. For example, the National Board of Professional Teaching Standards is developed and delivered with Pearson. So too is the Edtpa, which you folks might have heard of, the teaching performance assessment that's used for a variety of different purposes, both by higher education institutions and also by states for licensure and program approval purposes in different states across the country. But most of the different programs on this map are specifically state designed assessments where certain states have control over what the content is that's going to be assessed by the educator licensure assessments that are used in that state. And we end up really designing the test according to what the states are looking for educator licensure in each of the particular areas. So on the map, as you can see, there's mainly large and medium states that have state-specific educator licensure assessment programs. Florida, New York, Texas, California. All of these states have an overall state-specific educator licensure assessment program. They may have 30, 40, 50 different licensure areas, as you folks probably do in Virginia. But in that case, we end up working with the educators in those particular states and the credentialing agency in those particular states in order to be sure that the licensure assessments are reflecting what it is that the credentialing body is really looking for in those particular states. One growing trend that's also reflected on this map is states that are sharing educator licensure assessments. For example, the Foundations of Reading test, which you also see reflected in multiple places on the map. The Foundations of Reading test was originally designed by the Massachusetts Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. It was intended to really assess specifically the science of teaching reading for those teachers who are working with early childhood, elementary education, special education classrooms. And many other states are beginning to adopt that same assessment for a similar kind of licensure purpose. So there's been maybe 10 states so far that have begun to use the Foundations of Reading test as part of their efforts to improve the quality of literacy outcomes in their particular states. And we have additional states that are adopting that particular assessment really every year. I wanted to lay out all of that kind of context for you folks because as we start working with you folks on redeveloping the VCLA, which is what Dr. Johnson wanted me to come here and speak with you folks about, it's important for you folks to understand that we really will be relying on the Virginia Department of Education and its advisory bodies, including, of course, ABTEL, to really tell us what it is that you want by way of the content of the new VCLA, the design of the new VCLA. We will end up working in the process of recruiting Virginia educators and teacher educators, really at every step in the process, from the establishment of what the content specifications will be for the new VCLA, establishing what items will be used to measure the particular constructs that are going to be assessed by the new VCLA, making recommendations as to what the passing score should be for the new VCLA. Virginia educators and teacher educators will be involved in every step in the process. And as we do the work on behalf of the Virginia Department of Education, we will also be relying on the guidance and the expertise of the Virginia Department of Education to tell us what standards, for example, should be the foundation of the new VCLA. We have some recommendations. We do very similar tests in other parts of the country. We'll bring those recommendations to the table, but ultimately the decisions will be decisions that you folks will be making as part of the state-specific assessment development process. I wanted to lay that out because that will be a different kind of process than, for example, the regeneration of praxis tests. Those tests are off-the-shelf tests. They're developed by another third party without the same level of involvement from Virginia educators. So I wanted you folks to be aware of that. All of the work that we do in state-specific assessment development for educator licensure is all done at no cost to the state. And that's important for you folks to know as well. There are no additional funds that are needed from the state in order to pay for state-specific assessment development. The test development costs are paid for by the test fees that are collected as the test is delivered. So that certainly shouldn't hold you back from moving forward with redeveloping the VCLA. The agenda item mentioned regeneration, and I know that's the term that's used for the praxis test. We actually will talk about this as redevelopment as we start working on the VCLA with you folks. But if you want to go to this other document, there's a number of different elements of information contained in this packet around the redevelopment process for state-specific assessments. So you can read through this on your own. I don't need to walk through all of it right now. It's set up in a frequently asked questions kind of format. There's some information on page 2 regarding, again, how we will end up working with Virginia to enable Virginia's control over every aspect of the new VCLA. It talks about on page 2 what that development process looks like, how it is that passing scores would be set, again, based on recommendations once the new test has been developed by Virginia educators and teacher educators that we get together on the department's behalf. As you move on to page 3, it discusses other ways that we'll end up working with Virginia educators and teacher educators on different parts of the process. I already mentioned that Virginia educators will be involved in setting the content specifications. Virginia educators will review every single item in the item bank in order to determine which items are both accurate and appropriate from a content perspective to assess the particular constructs that will be measured. And also we'll have Virginia educators go through all of the test materials for bias prevention purposes. This is a really important aspect, of course, of the validity of any licensure test. And we'll want to be sure we have a diverse group of Virginia educators who will work with us and with the department throughout the process to review all the test materials and make sure that nothing is included in the test that will be unfair or discriminatory towards any particular group of potential educators in the state that are sitting to take the test. So in addition to those groups of educators to review content specifications and groups of educators to review items in the bank from a content perspective, we'll also have groups of educators reviewing items in the bank from a bias prevention perspective, and then finally recommending the passing score at the end of the test development process. So all of this is summarized on this page 4 of the document, the table that summarizes the test development process. And we're right here at step 1 in the process right now, of course, doing initial assessment planning with the state agency that's responsible for licensure in Virginia. There's a few important foundational decisions that are going to need to be made by the Department of Education, by ABTEL as the department's advisors, in order to really get us going on this process and enable us to start the process of recruiting Virginia educators to be involved. We're going to need to make some decisions about what standards should be the foundation for the new assessment. For example, some states have a similar test that relies on the grade 11 and 12 communications and literacy standards for students as being a standards document that can serve as a foundation for an assessment like this. Other states have used college and career readiness standards for that kind of purpose. Again, the communications area of those standards. But that's a decision, again, to kick off this process that will need to be made by the Department of Education with the help of its advisors. Also, there's a number of different design options, of course. The current VCLA has a combination of multiple choice questions of various sorts, sentence correction type items, open response assignments that are completed by the candidates to take the test. There's a variety of different item types that could be used for an assessment like this. There are different implications of using those different types. They affect the testing time, of course, for the candidates that are taking the test, for both the lengths of the test, the types of items included on the test, and also the cost of the test. Some item types, as you can understand, are more expensive than others to deliver and score and so forth. So again, those are decisions that need to be made really as policy parameters in advance of us starting the test development process. Thank you. So in that sense, we would recommend starting this process really with a workshop with you folks or with whomever the advisors are that Dr. Johnson, the Department of Education, identify as being the right people to work with us and with the department on this process. We would start with really a workshop that would focus on those two charges in particular, defining what standards are going to be the basis of the new VCLA, and also defining what the design will be of the new VCLA. Once we have those parameters established, then we'll be ready to go ahead and start the really involved test development process that you see represented in this table and design the state-specific assessment that reflects what Virginia wants this test to be for the folks who are taking the test in this state. So I'm going to stop there for now. I'll have a drink of water before I suffocate in my mask and answer any questions that you folks have.
Does anybody have any questions for from Phil? I know I can say from, and I'm sure other teacher education programs can say that sometimes this test is the hurdle that keeps people from getting licensure. And they can pass their praxis test, they can pass their RVE, they have success, other things, but something about the VCLA can really, I had one student who took it 14 times. She said, Dr. Bradley, I'm going to be a teacher. I don't care how many times I have to take this test. And so I think as we're in this spot, I think we really need to think about, and same with our public comment, about what are the things that how are we assessing them? Is there bias, and how can we, so do you have ways that you've been able to kind of, when you've used a similar test in other states, to kind of address those kinds of questions and concerns that come about as a result of tests like this?
Yes, thank you for the question. Some states have a test like the VCLA and some states don't. I mean, part of what I was trying to lay out before is that every state really, and you folks know this anyway, every state really approaches their educator licensure assessment requirements differently. And part of what we do at Pearson is really start with what that particular state wants. And every state configures their assessments differently. Every state designs their assessments differently. Every state makes different decisions about which standards, state standards or national standards, or a combination of both, are really serving as the foundation for the particular assessments that we're working on with them. But the good news, as far as your questions about the VCLA, is that this is an assessment that is entirely underneath the control of Virginia. So it can be whatever Virginia wants it to be. It should be whatever Virginia needs it to be. And Virginia educators will be involved at every step in the process to make those decisions. And we at Pearson, again, will bring our experience to the table to facilitate that. So to answer your question, I mean, we could start by, in that workshop I was mentioning before, maybe looking at some different kinds of alternatives that are used in other states. Multiple choice questions typically perform differently than constructive response items. Certain kinds of constructive response items perform differently than others. And we do have the benefit of some data around all of those kinds of things that can help to inform the kinds of decision-making that will need to be done in the state. But even as we get going, one of the key features that we would want to have in the test development process, as I mentioned just in passing before, is to be sure that we have a bias review committee really right from the very beginning, reviewing the content specifications that have been drafted by those folks who, Virginia educators who are working with us from a content accuracy and appropriateness perspective, so that we can have a diverse group of folks go through that content specifications and really take stuff out, put stuff in, reword things according to some structured criteria that we can bring to the conversation that have been used in other states to really ensure that the content from the beginning is as inclusive and as diverse as possible. And then the item types themselves, the same process. We have a structured bias review criteria that we can use, that Virginia educators, again, can use from across the state, from different race and ethnic groups, to be sure that the items that are going in the test are items that don't have the potential of creating a differential impact for folks from different race and ethnicity groups. And I encourage us to do that. And of course, we have statistical analyses, differential item functioning analyses that we can use as we pilot test items before we start using them as scoreable items on operational tests, to be sure that items aren't performing differently for different race and ethnic groups before we start including them on operational test forms as scoreable items. So I know all of my colleagues at the Evaluation Systems Group at Pearson do as well. We see bias prevention as really being integral to the validity of any test. And you folks know this, ultimately the validity of a test is based on whether or not you get results that are reflecting what somebody knows and is able to do. And if we end up bringing content into a test that gets in the way of people being able to demonstrate what they know and are able to do, then we won't have a test that's as valid as it otherwise will be. And that's why bias prevention really needs to be integrally involved at every step in the process to be sure that we end up with a test that reflects the diverse populations that are going to take the test in Virginia, and that only impacts people differently based on what they know and what they're able to do, and not based on their race or ethnic group, their gender, or anything of the sort.
Thank you. Any other questions?
That test, Virginia originally worked with us to develop that test 15 years ago now. The test development process has changed since then. There were Virginia educators involved at every step of the process then as well. But practices and assessment have changed since then. The needs of Virginia, I imagine, have changed since then. The expectations of Virginia, I imagine, have changed since then. And I think it's time to go through that process again with a group of Virginia educators who reflect all the different corners of the state, the different peoples of the state, and really end up with an assessment that reflects what Virginia needs today.
I would just highlight that from our perspective that, as you can see from the item, the historical development, right, and the focus on literacy obviously remains critical, and probably even more important now, relevancy around some legislation. So even in this group, we have discussed how we believe literacy and reading are critical at all grade levels. And so this particular assessment does focus on literacy for all endorsements. Right? So just making those connections. We've had those discussions about this. The VCLA is the one licensure assessment that will be required across all programs, all endorsements, whether it be the lower grades or the second grade. And to make us the connection between some of our discussions we had.
Steve?
I have a question for Listening in. She wants to know if the open response answers are scored by people or computer.
They're scored by people. In fact, they're scored by educators or former educators.
And she's also interested in having to take 14 pounds. What does it cost to take the test each time?
The prices on the website, I don't remember off the top of my head. Certainly 14 times would be expensive.
Right. And if you only have to take one section, it's like 95 or something like that, and then 130, but it, yeah, so. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Andy?
Can you tell us a little bit about what kind of information is Pearson produced on this test? What are you all showing that this test actually does? Because ultimately, when we look at any assessment, we want to see is it a predictor of high quality teaching? Is it a predictor of student learning? That kind of area. What are you seeing there on the Pearson side?
Well, there's two answers to that question. Well, there's a lot of answers to that question, but one thing that I can weigh in on is that certainly as we get involved in the design of the new VCLA with you folks, I know the department has data. Again, we deliver the test, we collect the data, we report the data to the institutions around the state and to the department. I think it'd be worthwhile looking at the data for the current version of the VCLA and how folks perform on the different components of the current version of VCLA as we make decisions regarding what the new version of VCLA should be like. And going back to the cost question, certainly, as I mentioned before, some designs, some item types are more costly than others. So there is an opportunity to revisit cost as well, because that ends up being dependent on what the design is, the amount of testing time, whether or not there are human scores involved and how involved human scores are and so forth. So those are all things that can be revisited and I think should be revisited. I think those decisions would be best as data-driven decisions, of course, like most decisions are. To your other question though, about the predictive impact of the assessment, Pearson doesn't have data on that. That would have to be something that was sort of a separate research project that was designed by the department here in Virginia. We deliver the test, we collect the data, we end up collecting the content validity over the course of the development process that shows that the assessment is measuring what it intends to measure, and we would be doing that for the new test as well. One thing I can say, because some states have taken on those kinds of predictive validity studies where they were looking at different kinds of educator licensure assessments and looking at whether or not they can predict the performance of an educator in the classroom, is that there's one sort of fatal flaw to those studies that I think states have really wrestled with, or at least one fatal flaw. And one of those is sort of determining what the dependent variable is, right? Of what does it look like to be an effective educator to start with? And lots of different states have had different opinions about that. Different folks in the educator literature field have argued about what the best way is of measuring what an effective educator is. If Virginia had a definition of what that outcome was that represented an effective educator in the state, then certainly it's something that the department or a research institution in the state could take on as being a project looking at that kind of predictive validity study. That's not something that Pearson itself does, though. We develop the tests with states when states want us to develop them. We deliver the test, we collect the data, provide it to educator preparation programs and to the department, but I don't have predictive validity study information that I could share with you.
But we do have some data, and so we were going to share that today as well, because many of us are working in the licensure committee to make that actual question. So I don't know if you're familiar with the story course, but I would ask our director, Ms. Clemens, to give us a high level that you can chime in terms of just looking at that. And I know you haven't looked at it yet, so I'm gonna try to share my screen. Actually, I've got it up. Okay, let me try it just a little bit.
So this is the data that actually Pearson supplied to us at our request for information regarding pass scores over the years. So as you can see on the reading subtest and the writing subtest, you can see the percent pass rates actually go down. Not surprising, obviously, for most of our committee members and from commentary across the state. I do think it's really important to know, and I know that we have a lot of IHE folks here. It's really important for folks to keep in their brain that probably only about 15% of our teachers actually come through. The rest of our folks, this is just Shelby's point, the rest of our folks are coming from an alternate route to licensure. And so if you're coming from overseas, if you have been trained overseas, if you're coming from out of state, if you are a career switcher, if you are a military veteran, if you have decided that you've done everything you want to do in your career and you want to do something in school. 85% of our folks are coming from an alternate route. So they can't necessarily benefit from the tutelage of an IHE that comes through the program to actually do this. So that might be a reason why we see some of this come down. I'm not really sure because I haven't looked into the historical data on that, but IHEs might be able to weigh in on some of that too.
But I will also say, though, that people who come through a non-traditional path now can actually not have to take the test if they have attempted it and had so many years of successful teaching experience and been recommended by a superintendent. So it really kind of holds a different level for our students versus people coming through that non-traditional path. And what ends up happening is they can't come through our path because we can't allow them to finish our program if they haven't passed the BCLA. And then they end up coming in through an alternate path. So technically we've prepared them, and I'm sure I'm speaking to the choir, but we've done all this work in preparing them. We've had to exit them from our program because they can't pass this. And then they come and they get teaching, they still don't have to pass it. So I think there's some disconnect on why students coming through our programs are held at a different level than.
Yeah, it's really important for folks to understand that the difference in alternate route and IHE route with different programs. Because again, just to your point, I mean, when we satisfy content first when we talk about licensure. So somebody had an English major and came to us and wanted to teach. If they satisfied that English content, we would be able to give them a provisional license with a requested division. And to your point, after 3 years, if they've attempted the BCLA and they don't pass it, their superintendent can request that assessment. So there's a lot of different levers here that folks need to just kind of keep in mind. Start talking about licensure and what it means to come through a program versus alternate route and where folks lie on that line.
And that these numbers reflect all of those.
All of
things,
these
all of
programs,
these.
all of
Right.
these programs. Yes,
So
thank
as we interpret numbers and as the world public interprets numbers, oftentimes they don't have the benefit of what she's just shared. So we must remember and help our colleagues understand that these numbers reflect all of those people that identify Virginia as the state where they are seeking license.
I will also say, and I don't remember what year it was, but there was a change in the way that we were scoring.
2013. so that's-
2013, right. Change in the way that we were scoring it. And that also hit programs hard because it had not been an issue previously. We might have to do some remediation. Yeah, but then when that came along, it really hit programs hard. And so that's also been a struggle. And I will say, even coming through our programs, students who are second language learners, really, I mean, phenomenal students that can really struggle with the VCLA. So I think those are all different areas that we need to consider. Any other comment regarding VCLA?
Quick question for Bill. If we decide to do this redevelopment or regeneration, with the time frame from start to finish?
It would depend on what the design was that we were working with you folks to implement and how many items need to be developed, that sort of thing. In general, it takes about 2 years usually, once you know what the standards are that you're basing an assessment on, to go all the way through this process that's laid out here, get to the point where folks are recommending passing scores and then implementing it. So, ballpark, once all the necessary decisions are made, probably about 2 years from there.
Anyone else? Well, thank you, Phil. We look forward to working with you on this and really kind of doing a deep dive on VCLA and moving forward with this. We really do appreciate it. I know it's something that is a constant conversation and especially in higher ed, and I'm sure in central office as well. So
We look forward to it too. Thank you all very much.
thank you. The next item on our agenda goes back to Eric Maffa. Yes, you may.
All right, thank you, everyone. Since our last ABTEL meeting, the Licensure Committee, which is one of our 2 standing committees on ABTEL, there's licensure and teacher education for those that are new. The licensure committee has met twice, December 6th and January 6th. In the wake of the last ABTEL meeting, we had a discussion about new reading assessments and sort of a regeneration of the RVE, which is the Reading for Virginia Educators exam that our elementary education teachers must take. So we took under the consideration redundancy between the ETS exam. I have the numbers here, 5002, which is our elementary reading and language arts subtest, and then ETS exam 5306, which is the RVE, the Reading for Virginia Educators. We also had several other concerns about the exams. There was the redundancy of content that we wanted to investigate, the cost of exams generally for people that are in the pursuing licensure, the number of exams that our candidates take, and the alignment of them, to Andy's point, of does an exam lead to, does test performance lead to good teachers? So we had lots of things going on, lots of, I guess, assumptions that underpinned our work. So we undertook a comparison of these two ETS exams, and there were several things that we drew from that. There is a difference in the content of them, although they also overlap in content. So the elementary reading and language arts subtest is mostly a content area test for language arts. It has your phonics and recognizing text structures and things in that regard. The RVE is an exam that you have to have that content knowledge, but it frames it as an exam around pedagogy of teaching, reading and writing, the use of assessments, reading strategies, etc. There's a difference in structure between the two exams, with the subtest one being 80 questions, the other one 80 like multiple choice questions, the other one being I think 100 questions and 3 constructed response questions, more open-ended questions. The pass rates between these two exams are actually very similar. Both are around 90%. I think the RVE was just slightly higher average pass rate. So we took into consideration that. We had discussions in our two committee meetings. And at this time, we had made the recommendation not to alter the current licensing testing requirements concerning these reading exams. The biggest factor, I think, driving our decision to not take action at this point would be there is potential code changes in the works with new literacy bills. Representative Coiner's literacy bill particularly, which seems to be moving forward. Our committee is also in favor of exploring the option, perhaps, of using the new ETS reading test that that would replace the RVE, as potentially, if you are successful in that it would be able to replace the elementary reading subtest, again, because of the sort of redundancy issues. And of course, we also have on our agenda the exploring the use of our VCLA, as Phil just talked about. So those were the highlights of our licensure committee meeting, and I would love to answer any questions if anyone has any.
Thank the committee for all of their work. And as a reminder, the ABTEL recommendation for the board was that we accept there are 2 assessments that were recommended for the reading specialist. That, I guess, the term is that we should think for ETS. And then there's the new elementary reading assessment that would replace the RVE for special ed and just recommending that those forward and ask for recommended was 1 standard there below recommendation process. That would move forward to the board in March. Recommendation. I guess I'll throw in so far the literacy bill is passing.
And I will say that we really, with the teacher shortage, that as a group, we really like wherever we can reduce the test, let's reduce the test. But we really just didn't feel like, as we kind of evaluated these 2 different assessments, I mean, I really think Eric spoke to it, the our number one thing is because it seems like the RVE is a little more complex, that if you can pass the RVE, maybe you don't have to take it can replace the elementary subtest, but that was really, so I think we're just kind of in a wait and see mode for some of those different areas. Okay, the next item on our agenda is item number 1, recommendations to approve new education endorsement programs at institutions of higher education. And this is with Ms. Janelle Torbert. I know she has been doing a ton of work on these. She's probably tired of looking at syllabi and
No, not at all, Nancy. Good morning, everyone. I bring to you for your approval today 6 undergraduate programs and 8 graduate programs. Just to give you a little background information, requests for Virginia institutions of higher education to add new education endorsement programs must be approved by the Board of Ed. The request must be made annually by March 31st of each year. The following programs today I recommend, present to you for new program endorsements. First, we have Bridgewater College, Journalism Add-on Undergraduate. Liberty University, Engineering Graduate. Randolph College, Computer Science Graduate. Visual Arts Pre-K-12 Graduate. History and Social Science Graduate. University of Richmond has 4 foreign language programs: French, German, Latin, Spanish, all graduate. Virginia State University, Visual Arts Pre-K-12 undergraduates. Virginia Tech, Career and Technical Ed, Agricultural Ed, undergrad. English, undergraduate. Mathematics, undergraduate. And lastly, History and Social Sciences, undergraduate. Program specialists at the Department of Ed reviewed the requests for the new education endorsement programs. Program endorsement competencies based on the regulations governed by the review and approval of education program in Virginia were verified through the review of course descriptions, syllabi, to determine alignment with each of the competencies required, including supervised classroom instruction. A review of the request for the new endorsement application submitted by the institute evidence written documentation of school divisions demand data, as well as institutional and school division support for requested programs. Per the regulations governing the review of approval of education programs in Virginia requires institutions seeking education programs approval to establish partnerships and collaborations based on pre-K to 12 school needs. All institutions of higher education provided a copy of the Virginia Department of Ed biannual approval of education accountability measure of partnerships, collaborations based on pre-K-12 school needs to form the requested program endorsement area.
Those of us who are in programs that are listed here, we will have to vote on those separately. So we can vote on all but Virginia Tech and Randolph College as a whole, as a group, to approve those programs, and then we'll, right, okay. So the first motion would be to approve, I need a motion to approve programs from Bridgewater, Liberty, University of Richmond, and Virginia State. Okay, and then we will move to approve. So then do you have to do an I for, or, okay. Okay. I. Okay, so then we will bring the programs from Randolph College up for approval. And so Peggy, you will have to abstain from this vote since you probably submitted these programs and probably had a lot of work going into them. So do we have a motion to approve the program at the 3 programs for from Randolph College? Okay, and then do you want to, yeah. Aye. I too was involved in the ones from Virginia Tech, so I will abstain from that. I guess I can still lead the vote. I just can't vote on it. So the 4 programs from Virginia Tech, do we have a motion to approve those programs? Okay. Okay. Me. Okay, so that takes care of the approval of these programs. I know Janelle has put a ton of work into this. I can't even imagine, and we really appreciate her work and effort that goes into, and all the content experts that work on those programs. So, all right, the next item is the review and proposal of new revisions to the guidelines for uniform performance standards and evaluation criteria for principals and superintendents. And this is Joan Johnson. So do you want me to bring you the microphone, Joan?
I don't know which ones, but the recent review of programs includes several for the first time undergrad education majors. I want to highlight that, as well as I know CTE has been on a critical shortage area. And so glad to see those coming forward from Virginia Tech as well. The second item is the review of the proposed revisions for the guidelines for uniform performance standards and evaluation criteria for principals and superintendents. As you may remember, we've had several presentations to ABTEL regarding the teacher evaluations. Those were approved by the board and have been implemented. And now coming full circle now around to completing phase 2, which is an opportunity to look at the performance standards for principals and superintendents. And so you all received the item that included the highlighted and strike-through versions of the changes, as well as the clean copy for both of these. So I won't go through all of those. I will just highlight some of the revisions that you see there. Again, emphasizing this will bridge the current and future teacher performance evaluation system. The major revisions to the guidelines in phase 2 is the creation of a new performance standard for culturally responsive teaching and equitable practices. The establishment of this performance standard addresses House Bill 1904, identical to Senate Bill 1196, passed by the 2021 General Assembly, requiring that evaluation shall include an evaluation of cultural competencies. And so let me just highlight a couple of things. Again, many were involved with this process, led by Strong and Associates, as well as Amy Griffith, who is serving as an educational consultant for our office. You see highlighted on the screen several areas that were engaged with work groups for this particular review, the multiple sessions for principals as well as superintendents, developing 4 iterations of the guidelines. You also note on the screen some of the major revisions include deleting selected background material and updating research around performance review and evaluation, as well as adding 2 new sections, growth and improvement, and what can school divisions actually modify. As you are aware, the VDOE is held accountable for providing guidance, but the locale and school division has an opportunity to make modifications or to develop components around their own local needs. Additional changes were in student division academic progress sections, revised data source descriptions for clarity, and modified rubrics to reflect continuum of effectiveness. Other changes made changes to existing performance standards, indicators, and rubrics to address new research and lessons from the field. And again, as we did with the teacher evaluation process, the creation of a new standard for principals. It reads culturally responsive and equitable school leadership, and for superintendents, culturally responsive and equitable division leadership. Description of standards, again, set performance indicators, performance rubrics, suggested artifacts, as well as sample survey questions were provided. Again, in your packet, you see the highlight on the screen as well of the new principal performance standard listed there, as well as suggested indicators. and superintendent now on the screen, as well as in your handout, indicating the focus on the support at the division level in leadership from the superintendent, as well as the indicators that were highlighted there. Next steps for the staff is that the final review will go before the board in March. There will be creation of training materials to support those that will perform those evaluations. And then in the summer, delivering regional training, 2-day sessions for principals and superintendents and board members that are responsible, as you all know, for superintendent evaluation. And continuing the statewide process, additional steps as directed by our office and the rollout of that process. There will be a public comment open period as well, following the next review in March from the board. So there will be additional opportunities for public comment from you as well as others around the state regarding these two changes and updates in the performance evaluations. But as a reminder, this was really a bridge and a stopgap to address the legislation that did pass. But phase 3, which our office is also leading, will really emphasize the comprehensive review of the entire system and structure. And you'll hear more about that in the timeline for that in the coming months. But I just wanted to give you an update on that status and the opportunity to review that. Any questions? High-level questions for me. I think that's it. Thank you.
I know this has been a phased process. Many of us went through the phases of the teacher revisions and now into principal and superintendent. So I think we can kind of maybe see the end of the phases coming to an end, probably then time to start again. But anyhow, so it's nice to see that these areas are moving along. The next item up for review is review of amendments to the licensure regulations for school personnel and comport with American Sign Language national certifications. Maggie Clemens. Oh, we need to vote. Okay, so we just need to vote on just that we accept the presentation.
Any changes and modifications that you saw in the document?
Okay, all right, so we need approval of the document as presented. Do we have a motion? Thank you. Okay, and now we'll move on to Maggie Clemens. Oh, sorry. Aye. Okay, now we'll move on to item number 3. And I do serve on a school board, but some things we do I vote for and some things we don't. And so I'm never quite sure. All right, item number 3, review the amendments to the license regulations for school personnel to comport with American Sign Language national certifications. Now, Maggie Clemens.
This is actually one of the easiest things you guys can do all day. We are only doing technical endorsement for American Sign Language. Program Endorsements has old on there based on the old. So, sorry, if I keep your voice out of your nose. My teacher voice apparently isn't working. These are just technical amendments so that we can make sure that our regulations are up to speed with the certification boards for American Sign Language. I had asked our policy team and our regulations team I tried to make this more durable, meaning that I tried to be more open and flexible with the certification so we wouldn't have to come back in and just all encompass and say, if it's from this particular organization, we'll take it. Our regulatory and policy team said we probably need to rein that in a little bit. And they were very specific that we needed to make sure that we had these specific certifications that we were going to accept in the regulation. So for your review and approval today, our technical amendments to the American Sign Language endorsement so that we can comport with the current certification process at these boards.
Need to have a motion to accept these changes to the regulations as presented by Maggie. Do we have a motion? Okay, and then I'll let Maggie. Aye. Okay, the next item that we have is liaison reports. Do we have liaison reports, Dr. Johnson?
Yes.
Okay, the first one is the Virginia Community College System, Dan Lewis.
Unfortunately, due to his work commitments, Dan is not available to attend today in Richmond, but sent the following updates. And as you all know and are learning for our new members, Dan represents the community colleges, but specifically provides some specific information regarding their alternate route, the licensure program. So today, Educate Virginia has begun its spring semester with 54 participants from across the Commonwealth. Those students will work through the level 1 semester and be eligible for licensure after May 14th. Additionally, the program administration is currently conducting on-site classroom visits to the current group of 94 first-year teachers in 34 school divisions and 6 private schools. January 29th will kick off the second ESOL, New Teacher Academy, being delivered by Ed Virginia with grant funding from the BDOE. The first academy took place in the fall and provided new teachers of English language learners instruction on how to use specific instructional strategies with their students. There were 25 teachers from the consortium divisions who participated. Also, the second ESOL Praxis Prep Workshop of the 21-22 year will be held in Harrisonburg in March. The information about the workshop will be released by the BDOE Title III office this month. Thank you, Dan.
Very good. It's always nice to hear how those systems are going. Do we have a report from Dr. Monica Osei from Chev?
No report.
No report. Okay, and then back to you, Joan, for the Virginia Department of Education update.
Thank you. I wanted to highlight several things. One, just as an update from the last board meeting, as you may remember, ABTEL recommended 2 new pass rates as well as the assessments for middle school math praxis and for the secondary mathematics assessment. As you know, this was the second review of that item by the board, as well as the supporting literature on the effectiveness of assessments to determine or predict or finding some correlation between the assessment and effective teacher practices to our conversation earlier today. So they received those things and it was quite a bit of discussion. We also had Malik, our representative from ETS, join us to answer some of their questions, as well as Maggie's, all of us at the podium at some point during the presentation. So as you can imagine, they continue to have many questions. So unfortunately, they were unable to determine an outcome and pass score at the last meeting, and they have recommended that that be reevaluated in March. As you know, we have brought on with our new administration, the appointment of our new state superintendent, Mrs. Baylow. And they wanted to engage her in comment and reflection also. And I think she was running to the meeting. She was not there during the item when the item was presented. So they had questions, again, still remaining about the effectiveness of requiring this, as well as really the cut score. So most of our discussion focused on the recommendation from ABTEL for 1 standard error below the recommendation. My interpretation is that they would prefer to have us use the recommended cut score at the pass rate from the multi-state standard setting committee, which in context of all other states puts us at the top within those states that are requiring that recommended pass rate. The pass rate that we recommended on behalf of ABTEL, the one standard error below, represented or would have put us in the category with other states such as Delaware, I think Mississippi and Arizona. Maggie, I think those three. So they were somewhat, it seems, my interpretation that they were concerned about us being in that lower category in Virginia. President Gecker suggested that potentially an option would be for them to accept the standard set by the standard setting committee, which would be the higher rate, and then create some accommodations for individuals that passed at a lower level. So again, all that was discussion, but again, emphasizing their, I guess, thought and discussion around assessments in the Commonwealth in general. So we were not asked for any new information. So I don't feel like the staff or this body potentially needs to provide any new information. There would be a potential opportunity if individuals wanted to come to the next board meeting and actually have comments about that, or it may not be an issue for us as ABTEL. But I did want to share that with you today, that they did not make a decision, and that has been moved now to the March meeting. So as you know, that was my concern, even bringing forth these other items, that there seemed to be a pause. Now, again, emphasizing that they wanted to engage the new state superintendent, Ms. Balo, in that discussion, and hopefully she will be there for the next meeting in that discussion. Unsure if we will be invited for any additional dialogue with the state superintendent around these issues, but I did want to share that update and give you a chance to ask any questions or have some dialogue around that postponement of a final vote on that item first. And then I have some other things. Any discussion around that item or questions for the staff? Yes, did the best that I could, indicating one, we were acknowledging that it was a new assessment, providing us an opportunity to collect data. And then they asked questions, do we have a threshold for that? Do we know how many we want? Do we have a timeline? Is there precedent? I was able to come up with 2 items. I knew we changed the VCLA score in elementary many years ago, but those are the only 2 on the spot that I could think of. And then I also talked about our discussion and concern about shortages, but they're very hesitant to lower our standards. I think that was my interpretation based on our needs in terms of a shortage for math in our state. And they actually were concerned that individuals were finishing teacher prep programs. And again, notice they may not be aware of exactly what Maggie was sharing with us today, that students are finishing approved programs and not being able to be successful on the assessments from our IHE program completers. So that was part of the discussion as well. And I think I was clear that there was generally consensus among all members in that recommendation. And then we did highlight that there was one, I think, individual that did not agree with that recommendation. So there was strong consensus of everyone that was part of that decision process. But again, you're welcome to come in March if you would like to also present additional arguments to the board. Yes, this was the math. This was the first one we did in, what was that, October? Nope. Yeah, so that was the math middle school and math secondary. Reading, the reading, yes. I'm not sure I understand your question.
There was one class where we as a board, we decided to table it because we felt we didn't have enough.
Oh, that was the chemistry. That was the chemistry. Correct.
So I guess I'm just wondering if the information we were waiting on for the other class is now not pertinent to this part of the discussion.
No, the chemistry is not available yet. What was missing from the original discussion was the companion guide. Because we had some folks who like to do the sample questions, kind of get an idea of what's on the test. And that was not available when we did the standard study and presentation for the technical report for the chemistry praxis.
I think Andy Cox had a question. No details. That was just one sentence, but there seemed to be some agreement that that was a good idea to have the cut score at the standard setting level, the recommendation, and then have some accommodations or options for individuals below that. But no discussion. Jenny, I think, has a question, right? No, go ahead. I'm sorry. Potentially, maybe that's the score one below would be acceptable as well. I'm not sure. I guess they wanted in policy and publicly that we were at that higher level, but then that there was some accommodation potentially at the standard error one, the -1 that we recommended.
You were saying that I'm sorry, you were, Nancy, you said that the people who go through the non-traditional teacher prep programs, if they are not able to pass the VCLA, but they have 3 years successful teaching, then the superintendent can request licensure for them. I mean, okay.
So it's really the 15% that go through our teacher education programs that are hitting those walls with testing.
Right.
Where it could be waived for somebody who's already teaching.
Right.
Yeah.
So theoretically, well, you said it for anything. So really that could be done for this as well. Somebody could have a provisional license
Right.
for math.
Very often they started our program.
Right. Right. Right.
That doesn't happen too often, right? Like, I mean, it is an option, but it's not like every day.
I would say that it happens quite frequently. I think there's been a shift, and again, I'm not an IHE person, but there was a shift several years ago where, and I'm gonna pick on UVA Wise and Andy because I'm a UVA Wise graduate. I was not able to major in education because at the time they didn't offer it. So I majored in history and then I did my education programs and then I did an alternate route actually because I didn't do my student teaching. But now the education majors may not get all of the instruction they need to pass that content subject test like mathematics. So we're seeing that our mathematics majors can pass the test, but sometimes the education majors, because they're not taking that rich content in mathematics, may not be able to. And so when IHEs sign off on the college verification form, if the person has not passed the assessments or hasn't done student teaching, they have to check no on program completer. That person isn't a program completer because in order to be a program completer, they have to actually have completed the approved program plus the assessments plus the supervised classroom experience. However, the IHE can fill the form no and then say they did all the coursework and it says completed all components of this endorsement with the exception of. And so it's either assessments or it's the student teaching. And so they can get hired because they can get a provisional license because again, the content has been satisfied. They can get that provisional license and then go into the school division. They have 3 years and they can pass the test, or the superintendent can ask for a waiver.
And I will also just say that I know from my experience at ECU, the be honest, that whole process that you're describing is not even happening because we have math and have a strong math program. And so they're not even coming to us. I don't even, we didn't even know that individuals were applying. They were be hired by the divisions. Sheldon and others around the state would hire math folks, master's levels or undergrad, right? And they can pass the test. So what I began to see is really those individuals that have the content in a master's or an undergrad level, that was easy for them compared to the narrow focus typically, right, of some of our secondary math folks, just because of the size of your program, right? So out of 100, let's say 120 credit hours for undergrad, we have general studies, and plus maybe 30 or 40 education courses. So that leaves a very few, right, for that almost a minor in a math. That didn't seem to really support them in passing those assessments.
So one further question, Maggie, what is IA? Is it IAG?
Education, IHE, Institute
oh,
of Higher
okay.
Education.
Okay.
So all of our state
Okay.
approved programs. I apologize.
Thank you.
Well, and often the struggles that we have is that if they exit our program, if they are a non-completer, then they also count against us. So even if we've prepared them and they've left our program because of testing, they count against our programs, and we have to maintain that we have an 80% pass rate or completer rate in order to maintain programs. And so it really is, it gets a sticky situation for institute. I mean, I have a couple right now, and we're at Tech, that are struggling with some licensure testing. And so it's, do you let them, what do you do with them at this point? And so it's really, it's a huge, it's a lot of stress for the institutions of higher education. It really is. Yeah.
Around the program to get a teaching license.
Yeah.
I think the message that we want to send is that we don't ever want it to be an easier route to skip a teacher prep program and to become a licensed teacher. And I think as the board considers scores and cut scores and everything that goes along with what is required to get a teaching license, that we're mindful that we really, I think most people would like teachers to have gone through a formal training program as opposed to going through a non-traditional route. And I hope that the board understands is that ultimately we're trying to make that happen with putting value into the scores that we really feel like are valuable scores and indicators of high quality teaching and high quality learning. I think somewhere that gets a bit lost in there, that we don't ever want it to be harder to become a teacher going through a teacher prep program than it is to go an alternative route.
And data will tell you that teachers who have gone through, have been well prepared, are more apt to stay in the profession than those who come through alternative routes. And it's just because of support and preparation and understanding of different things. So you could probably speak to that.
That is definitely the case. We struggle with retention of teachers who go through the alternative routes. And I think preparation beforehand has a lot to do with that. When the waiver was passed for the provisionally licensed teachers, has it ever been considered to set a criteria for one for the program completers?
No, because that's a state assessment that everybody takes. But I think too, going back to the concessions of what the board was talking about and us and the ABTEL board recommending that lower cut score, I think it's really, and I know I'm a broken record, but folks don't understand that there are two paths in Virginia to get this licensure. And I think that if it's explained and folks know where that lies in our percentage of students, and I think if there's a better understanding of that, something like, a lower cut score would make sense because not as many of our folks do come through those approved programs, that kind of thing. So I think when the board, was talking about concessions or lower scores of that type of thing, I think that they really need to have a strong understanding of where our teachers are coming from in these programs.
I would love for you to put some data together here on the licensure routes. could pull that based on college application. So that would be a great help. For this group as well as the board, I'd love to have that in March.
And Jen, maybe this is an opportunity for ABTEL representation to come to the school board meeting or the school board meeting. That's my board meeting to share some of those conversations. And so I haven't checked that date yet, but I'll see if it's something that I might possibly do. I don't know if somebody else would be interested as well, but I think it's a piece that I think is important to make sure they understand, it's not that we want to lessen the quality of teachers in Virginia. We just want to make it. Yes, absolutely. So, all right. And I think you have more reports. Oh, yes.
This may already exist, but I'm thinking about how we just got an HR annual report in Albemarle County that showed how many teachers applied, how many teachers were hired, where they were coming from, and their average years of service and that sort of thing. Is there like a state of the union for the teaching forces for all of Virginia, like reports that exist?
So unfortunately, your division is responsible for that. Our department, the BDOE, is not involved with employment. So we get some data from various assessments, IPAL, you probably love it, IPAL, et cetera, that tells us about some numbers, but it doesn't go into that kind of detail that you're asking.
So for the whole state, there's no giant collection of any of that information. It sounds like that is what would be valuable.
It is, but it's different. But Maggie, you want to highlight what we do have?
Several reports about teachers and how many years they've been teaching, but it doesn't come down to effectiveness. So the IPAL reports are school division reports that say this teacher is assigned to this course subject and they are properly endorsed, right? So on the teacher quality standard for school quality profiles and general, teacher quality is on there, but only as are they experienced? Are they currently teaching in the course that they're supposed to be teaching in because of their endorsement? What you're referring to would be something more of a dashboard that I knew that a lot of our IHEs are trying for us to do. The problem with that is that, as Joan articulated, school divisions are the hiring agent. So the state does not get any paperwork or feedback from school divisions on their teacher effectiveness because that's teacher evaluation. So it's considered the personnel record. So we don't actually have that information. Several years ago, they tried to, the legislature was referring to things like pay for performance, and it did not go well several years ago. And so I know that IHEs need this information because they have to track their alumni and they have to find out if they're still teaching in that particular division, if they've moved to a different division. But they too aren't getting, again, that personnel data on teacher effectiveness because unless you get an HR person that's going to release that information, it's not going to come from the school division either. Oh, okay. Okay.
I'm talking about licensure, employment, years of service, that sort of thing.
Yes.
I'm not talking about grading, evaluations. I'm not particularly interested in that. I'm just saying, like, we can use the data of how many people are coming into the state through other places, how many are seeking licensure through teacher prep program, how many of them stay employed in the state of Virginia for longer than 5 years. And that data would be very interesting and help us make more informed decisions about things like this because we're going in blind right now.
So we can track that they have gotten their initial license based on either an alternate route or through an IHE approved program and which one. But we can't track necessarily where they go to once they are assigned or once they're hired. So school divisions tell us who they've hired and we can put a primary employer flag on it. But unless there is a licensure action after that, we may not hear from that person for 5 to 10 years, depending on how long their license is. So, if I got hired in Loudoun County my first year, and then my second year, I decided that I was going to go to Fairfax, unless I went to a different system and saw the IPAL report, because that does have the teacher information on it, but their system doesn't talk to our system, we wouldn't be able to say for sure that those people are moving and where they're moving to.
We can do some licensure numbers, so we can't track where they came from, so at least we can provide that.
But that statewide data system is something as IHEs we have really wanted because we do have to, for accreditation, track our teacher candidates for 3 years past there. We have to collect data on them. And so as to what Maggie was speaking to, that really becomes a challenge when they get hired in their first year and then they go to that job and then they move maybe somewhere closer to home or they go somewhere else. And we're still trying, literally, I mean, tracking them like on Facebook as to who's, I mean, that is not a joke. That is not a joke. That is what we do. We try everything we can to get alternate email out, but to track them. But it's very antiquated, our system, in trying to get this information. So yeah, but all right.
I think it's a good idea. Individuals are available to come to the board meeting, and I'll follow up with everyone with the date. If you would like to, that also is broadcast live stream. Take with some public comment, but you at least could hear that discussion again. See what happens. And hopefully I have the right answers for them. Right? So it would be helpful to have some others there if, in fact, we would like to be. The other opportunity we'll have moving forward, she was not able to be here today, is that board member Ann Holton will be joining us as the liaison, right, for ABTEL. So she will be attending all of our meetings. She's available. So that's another way that we feel like that will engage the board with our discussions. So that has happened for many years, I know, right?
Right.
I've asked those questions and she said that she would attend. So also wanted to make sure logistically, like today, that we're making sure we got the logistics down of meeting in the hotel and those things before she comes. But I wanted to make that connection that will be another opportunity. And those of you that are new, we're also supposed to have legislators, right? There are at least 2 legislators that have been assigned to work with ABTEL as well. So the process, ideally, right, we're supposed to have a lot of stakeholders that are participating. Ideally, I do think Ann Holden will be a good representative from the board for us to work with. Next, I also want to give you an update. Again,
I'm going to bring you the mic, Jen.
we're going to actually ask Maggie to share a little bit about a recent report that we shared with the board on the Virginia teacher licensure policy, biases and barriers to diversity.
Thank you, Joan. So in the meeting packet, you've got VCU's Virginia Teacher Licensure Policy, Biases and Barriers to Diversifying the Workforce. This was in response to Senate Joint Resolution 15 from the 2020 session, I believe. And they were tasked with basically identifying biases in the licensure procedures and processes that we have in place. We had asked them to specifically look at assessments, policies, practices, business flows, just kind of examine all aspects of it. They had focus groups. They asked folks in the field about their experiences, and VCU's executive summary and study report should be in your board packet. There were 6 barriers that were identified. Some of them are things that are in process. So bias in teacher evaluations, that's being revised. Obviously, there's those new teacher evaluations and the training that goes along with that, and the superintendent and principal evaluations, supervision requirements, also part of that. Use of subjective language, and this goes back to the code. The Code of Virginia says that one of the criteria, if you're familiar with our application, there's some legal questions on there. This goes back to the code requirement that someone needs to possess moral character. And moral character isn't necessarily defined in the code, but then we use it on our legal questions. So there was a little bit of conversation around that. Disparities in opportunities. This is kind of going to go into Meg's shop, I think. It's part of educator engagement. We talk about recruitment and retention, pay scales, working conditions, those types of things. This is something that our office may not necessarily have firsthand ability to really effectuate anything, but it's certainly something that we could be proactive and advise school divisions in about where we're coming across the state, because we have that ability to see the working condition surveys and those types of things across the state. Number 5 was bias in licensure assessments, which obviously we have all spent many minutes this morning talking about. And then the last one was challenges in communication and processing. I like to call this our choose your own adventure on our website. Because right now you can't do that. If you wanted to teach in Virginia, you come to our website, and if you know nothing about policy or education or programs or assessments, it is very difficult to navigate. It's also very difficult to understand the process itself, because again, it goes back to how many alternate routes we have. I mean, we can always say, go to an approved program. That is very straightforward. You guys have amazing programs, and it's all very straightforward for them. And then there's folks who come to us that aren't going to go through that teacher education program, which I've discussed earlier. So, communicating to folks and being more available to folks to explain that, and having a website that, again, choose your own adventures, drop down menu. I am not a licensed teacher. I did not major in education, and what are those steps to get licensed? But also just the capacity of our department. Just speaking numbers, we have 10 licensed specialists. We have about 150,000 licensed teachers in Virginia, and we probably get 40,000 requests for actions on those licenses a year. That's 10 people, 40,000 requests. And most of those specialists are assigned to divisions to work specifically with those contacts there. We have a couple of folks who are assigned to consult with folks who may be from out of state, maybe military spouses coming in, maybe from overseas, or just, I've never done anything with education and now I want to kind of thing. So we do have folks, but again, not dedicated folks. We only have 10. And those 10 are either assigned to divisions to consult with those division liaisons, or they are assigned in very small portion to those folks who are not employed by a public school division. So we have a lot of opportunities that were not necessarily identified in the report, because the report's purpose was simply to identify where the barriers were. And so moving forward, we're going to take this information and just kind of start with a plan, a strategic plan to address some of these barriers. Meg's office and my office and teacher education are working together. And just trying to figure out the best. This is more of a landscape analysis so that we can kind of move on to what we actually need and what we can do to improve. One of the things that it was missing that I wish it had a little bit more opportunity to dig into was more of the comparison with other state policies. Other states probably, I mean, there's a scale there. There's states who have more diverse workforces than Virginia does. And what are they doing well? What have they tried that didn't succeed? And so I really feel like we're going to spend some time with our policy folks comparing more policies in other states that have a higher diverse workforce than we do to see what's working for them. So you'll probably see more information about that coming soon. We've got to get out of the legislative session so that we can get our policy folks more focused on that than the actual session. But this is just a report, a written report for your information. It was submitted to the Board of Education, and per the code, we did submit it to the governor's office prior to session, prior to the inauguration, and it went to the General Assembly as well, to the education committees.
Thank you. Max, since you've got the mic, why don't you also
So respond and give an update on the alternate route pathways and licensure and that review process that's also receiving a lot of attention.
Back in 2019, guidelines for alternate routes to licensure for school divisions was released via SUPS memo. It was 291-19. This was different than other alternate routes to licensure that we have in place, because this allows for school divisions to independently partner with educational organizations, community colleges, IHEs, to create their own route to licensure. This included content, professional assessments, and content, professional studies, and assessment. So the school division could partner with that educational organization, and teachers could go through this alternate route in their school division, and they would get a license that would be used throughout the state but the route to that licensure was only in that division because the school board had to approve that application. Now, we've had some folks some educational organizations who said, well, can I have this? Can I get an MOA with Loudon, Fairfax, and, Frederick? If all three of those school boards are willing to do that MOA with you, that's fine. But we need 3 separate applications because each individual division can have their own route to licensure. And again, they have to satisfy the content, the professional studies, and the assessments. And once they're done, they'll have a license that will work throughout the entire Commonwealth of Virginia. We've had one organization, or we've had one school board actually apply. That is Arlington, and they have requested an alternate route to licensure, and they're actually using the Montessori program as part of this alternate route. They have several Montessori schools in Arlington, and they are looking to get endorsements for elementary ed, pre-K through 3, K through 6, and also middle school. The panel has accepted the application and it is under review. Our panel consists of 3 folks, a current superintendent, a person from an IHE, a dean from an IHE that is part of an approved program so that we can get kind of that approved program approach to it, and also an educational partner who has extensive experience in curriculum and instruction in the school division and at the agency level. So we've got a really great panel that's reviewing this. There were some concerns when we first reviewed it regarding content, satisfying that content. If you're unfamiliar with Montessori programs, Montessori speaks a lot to pedagogy, but doesn't necessarily speak to content. And so we're trying to work with them to find a happy medium. Once the information comes back and forth on that review and the committee accepts it, we would submit it to the board for their review. Our goal on the committee is to make sure that all of the questions that the board is going to come up with are answered prior to submitting the application. It is not an easy process. This is very much like our alternate route, like a career switcher program, where they have to submit matrix and they've got to come back and they've got to show that everything, the competencies of the approved program are met, as well as the licensure requirements are met. And so we're trying to be very diligent and thorough in our review, since this is the first one that's come through, and we know of several school divisions that are coming through with other alternate routes to licensure. But we are using that career switcher alt route as kind of the foundation for review, so that we can make sure, since we already know that that's a process that we've used for years now, it's a good way to just kind of filter this through as well. So the review panel is asking for additional information from Arlington. At this point, I expect probably a couple months of back and forth just to make sure that their application is very solid before it goes to the board, and then the board would actually approve it. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Maggie. Again, informational. Again, want to be transparent about many of the things that our staff are working on and how it will impact all of us. And we too are trying to refine the process for review, process being transparent about those that are approved, right? Again, internally working on some process procedures as well. So you'll hear more about that. Next, as we approach almost 11, but really quickly, I want to highlight also and thank one of our new staff members and acknowledge her today. Dr. Meg Homer is with us. She's one of our new staff that we're really excited about having her, probably the first staff that the VDOE teacher licensure has had in at least 10 years. So very excited about that. And we thank General Assembly for that support. But she's been doing a tremendous job working with the focus on engagement and specifically our recruitment and retention. And so I'm going to just high level a couple of things, and Meg, you and I can kind of join in. I've got a few slides just to highlight. Obviously, we know that the pandemic has only exacerbated the teacher shortages in our state. And so today we're not going to go through a lot of time, but we do want to make you aware of how our department is addressing that and provide some reminders of how you can help us as well. And so we know that in the past, Virginia has always had strong interest in recruitment and even broadening that to a diverse teaching pool as well. And so recently, as relates to the pandemic, we have received some federal funding to support us. And so we've always had great ideas and innovations, right? But not having the resources to implement those or to sustain them, right? Versus some one-time shots. And so you see on the screen today, and Meg, you want to just highlight some of the work that you're doing with the strategic plan that's highlighted on the screen as well?
Well, good morning, everybody. It's so good to put faces to names. Really appreciate being here and very excited to be working with the VDOE. This specifically speaks to our strategic plan, as Joan mentioned. That's just one of the many things we're kind of undertaking in terms of addressing recruitment and retention. There are numerous strategies we've sort of identified and articulated. We don't want to get too far into setting those in stone. We are meeting with a newly formed Recruitment and Retention Advisory Committee. Our first meeting is tomorrow. We've got representatives from across the Commonwealth. We've got folks from higher ed. We've got principals, superintendents, HR professionals, human capital professionals, I should say, from just about every region, I believe, is represented at this point in terms of those who've accepted the invitation. So they will be reviewing these goals that we've drafted with an external partner. Just to get initial feedback. And we have identified potential strategies, but as I said, we don't want to get too far into setting those as part of the plan until we get feedback from this advisory committee. But we're very excited to have that meeting on the books for tomorrow evening. And hopefully we'll make some progress. I anticipate we will, because the enthusiasm has been quite great. We've really been pleased with the number of people who are willing to serve on this committee and also to serve on a related steering committee that will be focused on human capital equity as well. So that just speaks to the strategic plan. Joan, I'm happy to talk about anything else if you'd like.
Some of you may be familiar with this recent news release highlighting the funding we've received and some of the potential strategies that we're using to maximize that. And I'm just going to highlight a few. We're not going to go into detail, but again, the SOUPS memo has gone out in early January highlighting this initiative, the development of several strategies. There was a RIPE grant that supported incentives for hiring. You also see there several initiatives related to staffing, to special ed, building capacity with math and literacy, continuing education support, probably one of Meg's favorite new grants that is really off the charts, providing support for any educators, staff that are in the system that want to choose to complete their licensure requirements, whether that be counselors, et cetera, social workers, bus drivers, et cetera. They also see expanding our residency programs in the state with an HBCU focus, as well as several others, paid internships, communities of practice for superintendents, additional support for mentoring initiatives, an online mentoring Virginia new program that will be available across the state, as well as support for praxis and other assessments, financial, and then support for our upcoming conference, I think in March, for Educators Rising. So you see a multi-level approach addressing multiple levels of the pipeline in terms of recruitment and then retention. And what you don't see here, Meg and I are working on, one is working with a marketing firm who is actually going to be leading a campaign for the profession over the next 2 years. We're in phase 1 of that kind of landscape analysis and researching our target audiences. So you'll hear more about that, but really excited about some of those initiatives. And thank you, those in the room that have helped us support us in the implementation. So looking forward to a report from that advisory in the coming months as they progress in their work as well. But wanted to just bring your attention to some of those initiatives. And hopefully they're not surprises, and you are familiar with all of these already, but wanted to bring them forward. And I think unless there are any questions about that, that would end my general liaison report from the department. To answer any questions.
Education were contacted to have students be paid interns, and that was just a really exciting piece of that. So it was nice to see some of that money coming our way, and I'm sure districts as well. The next thing on our agenda is announcements and discussion. One of the things that was brought to us as we were opening up this year on ABTEL is, I mean, we're a really diverse board. We represent every region across the state of Virginia. We've got school divisions and teachers at different levels and institutions of higher education, school board members, and so on. And so what we'd really like to do is know, are there things that you would like to see brought before ABTEL? Are there pressing issues that you would like to have a presentation on, that you would like to see us try to address? And so I kind of wanted to open the floor to that now and see if there are things that you feel like we need to kind of put on our future plans. So are there anything that you feel like we should consider? Yes.
So in listening to the discussion about the BCLA and things like that, are there any preparation things that could help these students prepare for this class? Is there any content to help them get ready other than their teacher preparation program? But with certain subject areas, there's always something that they can use to help them prepare, like practice questions and things like that. Is there anything out there that they can have to help them get ready?
There are materials available. There are different companies put out preparation materials. There's things available on the BCLA website, like a breakdown of the test and looking at different sample questions and opportunities. And then different universities have different ways, or colleges, that we kind of help students who are struggling to pass it. Right. So so I mean, there are ways that we work to try to remediate for students who are struggling with testing. Absolutely. Do I think there could be more? Yeah, I think there could be a lot. It'd be nice to have. I mean, there's no limit to the amount of support that you would want to give these students because it's truly a huge financial burden as well. When you take that test multiple times, and sometimes they'll get within 1 point, like and it's so frustrating. And so they just, yeah. Anything else that maybe you think would be something for us to focus on as we move forward, or something you'd like to have more information about?
I think we're going to continue the discussion on licensure and assessments. That is actually probably ask us for more information. Licensure committee. Those of you that are not on that committee that may be interested, especially from our new members, that is an opportunity. And then we have a teacher prep subcommittee as well. So I think the licensure question is coming up. We'll talk more about that. Talk more about UCLA for sure. Are there some other ways? And I think in my discussions with the representative from ETS, he also described that some states use multiple different paths for assessment, not just the standard kind of reference test, but there's some other options that a state could choose. Very similar to potentially what the BCLA and some of those proposed recommendations are. So I think I want to ask them to come back to have some more discussion about that. And some of us are working on a state collaborative team looking at licensure. I think that will also be an opportunity to bring something back to this group. From the board's perspective, I did want to highlight they also discuss their agenda for the coming year, and just emphasize the board's emphasis will be on looking at really the systematic approach, integrating major components, including licensure, educator prep, renewal, early childhood, performance piece, looking at evaluation, and how those pieces all relate to really take our state to the next level. And so you'll hear more about that, but I guess I wanted to share that, and literacy also is one of their priorities for the upcoming year. Literacy in the systematic approach.
Jen, I will say in the past, we would have somebody who came and did a legislative update for us on a regular basis. And I think that would be helpful as quickly as things seem to be changing and what implications that has that we can take back to the different groups that we represent.
So in the past, we waited until after Jefferson.
Right.
So that we could give you factual information. But right now, things are still in the process. So I think in March, I don't know the date of our next March meeting, but potentially the legislative update will be in March, for sure by April.
Yeah, March 21st or April 18th. But I do, yeah. That would be excellent, yes.
List. Department of Education tends to get the most bills, I feel like, when it comes through. You need to be aware of Senate Bill, let's see, 236. This one is very similar to, I'm sorry, House Bill 236 is very similar to House Bill 1776 that we had last year. This is going to get anybody whose license expires in June 30th, 2022, an extension on their license. That includes provisional licenses. That includes TP licenses, all the license type. If it expires on June 30th, 2022, you can get an extension. It is unconditional. All we need is a request from the individual to actually extend it. Part of the legislative action summary that we submitted for this is that we continue to be concerned about folks who have provisional licenses. Provisional license folks have 2 allowable extensions under the current regulations that have nothing to do with the legislation. So if you have a provisional license that expires this year, in essence, you could get 2 more extensions if your superintendent requests it. But under this legislation, you will get 2 years regardless. You don't have to, it will not take away your other 2 extensions. And then after these 5 years, you can still get 2 more extensions on your provisional license, allowing for 7 years under a provisional license. So we've been watching this one. It has sailed through the House with no problem. It does not have a companion bill on the Senate side. We don't anticipate any issues on the Senate side, but we'll see what happens after crossover. We have companion bills for, let's see, Senate Bill 68 and House Bill 979. The Senate bill is Favola and the House bill is Tran. This is allowing for folks who are certified teachers outside of the United States who come to the U.S. To get a provisional license here to teach into our classrooms. We're trying to make an easier pathway, a more clear pathway for folks who are coming from out of country to get a license here in the States. There's a lot of conversation behind the scenes on this because the code language that they're pushing forward is very broad. It mirrors the reciprocity language for states right now. And so it's a very broad swath of things that they're asking for, but internally, if you're very familiar with licensure, there's allowable deficiencies for provisionals. And we also do something called a statement of eligibility, which is actually not codified, but it's part of our practice. And so there's a lot of conversations happening offline about those folks who are coming to us with an out-of-country license. We also have companion bills, Senate Bill 154 from Locke and 230, House Bill from Carrie Coiner. This is very easy. This is to basically expedite the timeline for determination of a license for military spouses. As folks in the divisions are probably aware, when you get duty orders, you move regardless of how much time you have. And so we're trying to expedite those applications for licensed teachers from out of state. This also follows legislation that was done probably in 2019 that required DPOR and DOLI to do the exact same thing. Those are the folks who are licensed to be nurses, folks who are licensed to do HVAC. They also were legislated to have an expedited timeline, but it did not apply to teacher licensure. So they're just cleaning up that language. We have the capacity to do that in-house. We just needed to have it, in the code. We have Senate Bill 829, which is related to school counselors and staffing ratios. And the flexibility there. School counselors are probably one of our, critical shortage areas outside of your traditional instructional teaching position. And so there's a bill that allows for a little bit of flexibility in those ratios so that we can get folks into those positions. The language is very broad. It says any licensed professional. So I expect that it will have some amendments. And I haven't followed that one as closely. BOISCO has Senate Bill 454. This one is on teacher corps. This was originally scheduled to go through the SHEV, through the State Council of Higher Education. It's more of if you're familiar with AmeriCorps or VistaCorps, it's more of that type of program. It actually establishes a commission for cohorts at certain universities for a teacher corps program. As I said, it was originally done through SHEV, and so it literally got handed to us, I think, last Thursday during the session, and so we were looking at that and preparing a legislative action summary for our policy staff to move forward on that. There are several others that I know Joan has been working on that deal. Okay.
I guess to touch on one, Amanda's area in terms of employment of teachers. So as you all know, we've got the director of professional practice with us today, Amanda Blatt. Wanted to thank her for being here and her leadership in responding to multiple initiatives. There are regulations that govern the division's employment as well as misconduct, and thus the connection with the license in our office. Several things there. There was an update regarding barriers to crime, right? It was part of the application. There was an update there, as well as some areas in compensation that you'll hear more about. There was also is legislation that allows for tax deductions for materials that are used for teachers. I know we're all excited about that. Also related to some of our IHEs or EPPs, educator preparation. The literacy, we'll start there. The literacy bill that's coming through will highlight one, creating a statewide framework for teaching literacy and reading that will also require the IHEs or EPPs to have an audit on specific courses and programs around that conceptual framework. You'll hear more about that. So that will impact us at the college as well as division levels and requiring specific credentials and training for those that are employed around literacy and reading. So you'll hear more about that. Also, there's proposed, you talked about the teacher corps. Let's see what else is there for colleges. Trying to think and look at my notes. College partnership for laboratory schools and proposal. A couple more, but those are the high level ones I think that will you'll hear more about. But we will have a final official report probably from one of our policy staff come in March or April to give you all of the updates. And you can follow along on the various websites that are available to us. Even the VDOE has a link on our webpage to the General Assembly notes as well. So I think that answers your question, Nancy, on the fly. So a couple of logistics, I guess, as we transition before the adjournment would be one, we're going to stop recording shortly after the adjournment. And also a couple of reminders I'll make after you adjourn. So we can stop.
Thank you. Yes, Steve. That would be wonderful. Absolutely. Any other suggestions? Anyone?
And just a follow-up, we've always had the teacher year.
Without any further comment, we will adjourn this meeting of the Advisory Board for Teacher Education Licensure. Thank you all of you for coming. It's nice to see everybody face to face and hope we can continue to to get more and more people here. So thank you so much.